We're going to take a deep dive into one of the most infamous events in history, the Chernobyl disaster. We're going to go past the headlines and look at the minute-by-minute decisions, the cascade of human errors, and the one single fatal design flaw that turned a safety test into a global catastrophe. So, let's get started. Okay, so picture this. It's the middle of the night in the control room of reactor number 4 at Chernobyl. Deep inside the reactor's core, something is going terribly, terribly wrong. The massive 1,000-ton lid covering the core starts to shake violently. Shockwaves are literally ripping through the building. The operators know, in that gut-wrenching moment, that the reaction is completely out of control. So one of them does the only thing he can think of. He slams the emergency shutdown button. The big red button that was supposed to save them all. But it didn't save them. In fact, it did the exact opposite. Just seconds after that button was pushed, a colossal explosion tore the reactor apart. And then a second, even bigger blast. The core was completely blown open and a fire started spewing this deadly plume of radioactive material high into the atmosphere. The amount of fallout was just catastrophic. We're talking about the equivalent of 400 Hiroshima bombs. It was, and still is, the worst nuclear disaster the world has ever seen. And that, right there, is the core mystery we're unpacking today. How could the one single action designed to prevent a meltdown, the failsafe, the big red button, be the very thing that lit the fuse? How is that even possible? Well, to figure that out, we've got to pop the hood and look at how this machine was actually built. So the reactor at Chernobyl was a specific Soviet model, an RBMK 1000. These things were the workhorses of the Soviet nuclear program. They were powerful, pretty cheap to build, but they had some incredibly dangerous quirks. And the easiest way to get your head around its fatal flaw is to think of it just like a car. You've got 3 main parts controlling the power: an engine, an accelerator, and of course the brakes. The analogy is actually pretty simple. The uranium fuel rods, that's your engine. They create all the energy through nuclear fission. Then you've got the graphite moderator, which acts as the accelerator, the gas pedal. It speeds up that chain reaction. And finally, you have the boron control rods. These are your brakes. They absorb neutrons and slow the whole thing down. Just remember this one simple rule. More graphite means you're flooring it. More boron means you're slamming on the brakes. So you might be asking, why was the reactor so unstable to begin with? Well, it all kicked off because of a safety test. On that night, the engineers were trying to answer a question. If the power went out, could the reactor's spinning turbines keep the water pumps going for just 60 seconds until the backup generators fired up? The crazy thing is, they had actually failed this test before. As the operators started powering down the reactor for this test, something really weird happened. The power level just plummeted. It fell way, way below the 700 megawatt target, all the way down to just 30. And the reason? A strange phenomenon called xenon poisoning. The best way to think of this is like sludge building up in the car's engine. A byproduct called xenon-135 started absorbing all the neutrons, basically acting like an extra set of brakes and choking the reaction. So they're panicked. They're trying to get the test done, and the shift supervisor starts making a series of absolutely catastrophic calls. To fight that xenon poisoning and get the power back up, he orders the operators to pull out the boron control rods. You know, the brakes. They just kept pulling them out until only 8 out of 211 rods were left in the core. This was a massive violation of safety protocols. The rulebook said you must never have fewer than 15 rods in. The reactor was now like a car hurtling downhill at full speed, with basically no brakes at all. As the power began to surge uncontrollably, the operators did the last thing they could. They hit the emergency shutdown. This was supposed to ram all 211 control rods back into the core at once and kill the reaction. But what nobody in that room knew was that the very thing designed to save them, the brakes themselves, had a hidden fatal flaw. And here it is, the fatal paradox. The main part of the control rods was made of boron, the brake. But the tips of those rods were made of graphite, the accelerator. So when they hit that shutdown button, the graphite tips entered the core first. For a few critical seconds, instead of slamming on the brakes, they floored the gas pedal on an already out-of-control reaction. The power surged to over 100 times its normal output, and the reactor blew up. The explosion, as horrifying as it was really just the beginning. The aftermath would unleash this devastating wave of human, environmental, and political consequences that, honestly, we still feel today. It created a legacy of fallout in every single sense of the word.
The immediate human cost was just immense. The first responders, firefighters who thought they were just rushing to a normal fire, were exposed to absolutely fatal doses of radiation. 28 of them died from acute radiation sickness within months. Then there were 3 heroic divers who waded through radioactive water to drain a tank, an act that prevented a second steam explosion that could have been even worse. And after that, hundreds of thousands of liquidators were sent in to clean up, many of whom suffered from terrible long-term health problems. And for years afterward, thousands of children developed thyroid cancer, many from something as simple as drinking contaminated milk.
So, faced with this unimaginable catastrophe, what was the Soviet Union's first instinct? Secrecy. For 2 entire days, as this lethal, invisible cloud of radiation drifted across Europe, they said nothing. It was only when a nuclear plant in Sweden detected shockingly high radiation levels and traced them back to Ukraine that the Kremlin was finally backed into a corner and forced to admit what had happened. And the financial fallout? Just as devastating. The cleanup, relocating entire cities, long-term health care, lost productivity, it all added up to an estimated $235 billion. That's a crippling economic blow, one the Soviet Union would never really recover from.
You see, Chernobyl wasn't just a nuclear disaster, it was a political disaster. The botched cover-up, the exposure of these deep-seated problems in their technology and bureaucracy, it just shattered public trust in the government. A lot of historians now point to Chernobyl as one of the major reasons the Soviet Union finally collapsed, just 5 years later.
Trying to contain the still deadly reactor has been a massive engineering challenge for decades. First, they hastily built this concrete and steel shell over it called the sarcophagus back in 1986. But eventually, that started to crumble, so an even bigger solution was needed. In 2019, this colossal structure called the New Safe Confinement, literally the largest land-based movable structure ever built, was slid into place. It's a $3 billion arch designed to keep the site safe for the next 100 years. Today, the area around the plant, the exclusion zone, is abandoned by people. And in our absence, something remarkable has happened. Nature has come roaring back. Wolves, bears, rare eagles, they all thrive in the forests of Chernobyl now. The disaster stands as this terrifying monument to human error. But the rebirth of this ecosystem, it leaves us with one final haunting question. In the face of our greatest mistakes, what does nature's incredible resilience truly tell us about ourselves?